Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather we live in extraordinary ones where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives to share resources to help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes and sign up for our newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. You can also become a supporting member of our podcast with a small monthly donation. Look for Embodiment Matters at patreon.com.
Greetings, listener friends. We're so excited to share with you this conversation we had with Mark Nepo. And Mark is a renowned poet, writer, spiritual teacher, and we have been following Mark's work for many years. Our collections of his poems and prose are well worn with multiple readings and many bookmarks. And in our conversation, we roam through many different essential terrains. Throughout the conversation, Mark weaves in readings of some of our favorite poems of his, and we reflect on those. And we also look at just the challenges we face in these times and how care and love can erase the walls that build between us, and how important it is to use our imagination in service of a more beautiful world. Mark has a beautiful quote from William Blake around "Straight is the road to improvement and crooked is the road to genius." And looking at the original definition of genius, not as an exceptional person, but affirming that each of us carries a unique genius and how important it is for us to bring that forth into the world. Mark also shares many stories from his book, More Together Than Alone, around the power of building community and connection. And he also shares a potent story about literacy in the dark ages in Europe, when only 10% of the population was literate, and that 10% kept literacy alive during that time. And what would it be to be part of the 10% to keep the literacy of the heart and soul alive during these challenging times? So we hope you enjoy the conversation. You can find out more about Mark Nepo and his teaching schedule and writings and work at marknepo.com. And for those of you who live in Utah or near Utah, in February of 2022, Mark will be coming to Salt Lake City to teach 2 workshops for the Jung Society of Utah, a Friday night presentation on heart work, being a spirit in the world, and then an all-day Saturday workshop on reclaiming our humanity, being fierce and tender in our call to love. And you can find out more information about those or buy tickets at jungutah.com, JUNGUTAH. And enjoy the conversation. So welcome, Mark. We are so delighted to speak with you this morning.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to being your way next month.
Yes.
Us too.
So one question we often like to begin these conversations with is around embodiment. And what does that word embodiment mean to you on this particular morning?
Yeah, well, I think embodiment really means living your life, for me, with as little between what's in here and out there as possible. You know, I think there's historically throughout time, you know, we always have these choices because we have this amazing thing we call a mind, a great tool. So we can not be embodied. We can escape. You know, we can look 30,000 feet up, which is wonderful that we can do that. Only if we take that knowledge and come back into our bodies. And so, you know, we can transcend out of here and then we're, barely tethered to the earth. But without that larger perspective, without that felt connection to everything larger than us, we can be ground down by only being embodied. We can be burdened by the weight of everyday detail and grittiness and pain and suffering. So we somehow, I think, are challenged, all of us, to do both.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's a small poem of mine, I can't recite it exactly, but it's an image. It's called Sugar in the Tree, and it basically goes that, as a man sitting under a tree can imagine the tree from up in the clouds, an encumbered heart can know eternity.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful.
And one other little story about embodiment. I don't know if you know that out in Boulder, excuse me, in Boulder, Colorado, Naropa University. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've spoken there a few times, and I was very interested, as I always am. Well, why was it called Naropa? And I found someone, a professor there, who told me this wonderful story. So Naropa, in the 11th century in India, Naropa was a world-renowned scholar of all religions. I don't know if you recall Euston Smith, who died in the last few years. Mm-hmm. He was kind of like a Euston Smith, Naropa was, in the 11th century. Knew all the different pathways and doctrines and practices. So he was walking along, I forget what city it was in, and where the university was, and he was walking along, and an old woman was coming the other way, and they nodded, said to each other, and then she stopped and she looked at him and she said, "Are you Naropa?" And he, got all puffed up. He was ready to sign an autograph, And she said, "Do you know the heart of all those teachings?" And he was kind of caught off guard and was somewhat offended. So he said, "Of course I do." And they started walking away. And he got about 20 feet away from her, and he knew that he didn't. And he ran after her and knelt before her and said, "Be my teacher." And so Naropa is actually a university that's based on embodied wisdom, which I love.
Mm-hmm. It's a really beautiful story.
That reminds me of that image from the Mary Oliver poem of Shams throwing all of Rumi's books into the pond, the beautiful book-eating pond.
Yes.
Well, before we throw the books into the pond in this conversation, I would really love to ask you if you'd read some favorite poems, and we have so many of them. But would you start with Adrift, which feels like such an essential poem for these times?
Sure, and let me share that this is a poem where, and for me, the poems are teachers, and I retrieve them more than create them out of nothing. And once they're here, they become my teachers. And this was a time, because the poem, and I appreciate your asking for that, the poem is about grief and learning from grief. And there's so much of that right now because of the pandemic worldwide. But for me, this poem came from, probably about 8-9 years ago. There was a time, about a year and a half, where my wife Susan and I went through a lot of loss. We lost her mother and both my parents and our former dog, our beloved dog Mira. And so I was sitting on a very sunny day on our deck, and it was just a beautiful day. And all of a sudden, I just fell into this ripping moment of grief about all these losses. And I think I was, too tired to choose between the beauty of the day and the depth of the grief. And so it led to this poem, Adrift. Everything is beautiful, and I am so sad. This is how the heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. The light spraying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibers of memory forming their web around the knot in my throat. The breeze makes the birds move from branch to branch as this ache makes me look for those I've lost in the next room, in the next song, in the laugh of the next stranger. In the very center under it all, what we have that no one can take away, and all that we've lost face each other. It is there that I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I am so sad, and everything is beautiful. And I think that's a good example, and I share this because it's not a poetry example, it's an introspective example, because this process is introspective. I just happened to write it down. But when I started that, the reward for being honest about where I was in that moment was that I was led to that insight. In the very center, under it all, what we have that no one can take away, and all that we've lost face each other. It's there that I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I didn't know that when I started the poem.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you brought that line, because that is such a teacher, as you mentioned. It's just profound. I'm crying all over again.
Yeah, and I love what you shared about being too exhausted to choose between the sunshine and the porch and the grief, and that, like, when something is exhausted enough, another layer is revealed.
Well, we're open to it. Carl Jung had a habit of, if he really wanted to learn something, he said he would wait till he was really tired just before he was going to sleep, and he would say it and write it and visualize it, because he felt when he was tired there was more chance that it would get in.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond his order, whatever his thought or his structures of how he saw the world, they would be loosened when he was tired, and more could get in.
Mm-hmm. I love that you talk about, you're writing poetry as a practice of retrieving. And I'm such a lover of poetry. I don't identify as a poet. And I'm really curious, how do you set yourself up to retrieve like that? What's your poetic writing practice or retrieving practice like?
I think it's about being present. For a long time, years ago, before I experienced meditation, I came to understand that was the space I was going to write. But instead of dropping all thoughts, I was just taking notes and trying to sort out what mattered. And I think this comes more deeply from, when I was young, like most artists in different forms, were taught to be on the look for good material. Well, in my 30s, as you know from my work, I had a rare form of lymphoma, which I almost died from, and being blessed to still be here, the miracle was that it's not about looking for good material. Everything is holy. And the gift was the lens of the miraculous, of seeing, if I'm present enough, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. So I can write about anything. It's not about looking for what to write about. It's about being present enough and still enough, giving my full attention to whatever is before me until it becomes my teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I share that as not just a writing process, but as an inner process for how to be embodied,
Right.
how to stay in our lives, and how to remember our kinship with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it goes so counter to the culture of ascension and improvement and always being on. I mean, even like what you were describing of Carl Jung's process of what wisdom in there is there when things are dimming or going down or not on.
Yeah, and I think that there's nothing wrong with working toward things or building things or repairing things, but my experience, it's a very different animating process when it comes from my being completely who I am, than a sense of trying to achieve something in order to get some worth
Right.
externally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of Blake's proverbs was that straight is the road to improvement, but crooked is the road to genius.
That's wonderful.
I haven't heard that. That's good.
And if we look, let's take for a moment, because to look at that word genius, because it's even more profound when we look at the original meaning of that word. You know, we tend to understand genius as an exceptional brilliance, like Mozart, or Itzhak Perlman or Einstein, but which is true. But if we go back, the original definition of the word genius is attendant spirit. Everyone has a genius. No one is special.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a genius, and this is where the word genie comes from. And the famous, the old story from the Arabian Nights of Aladdin's lamp, where, well, what that archetypally is, it's not that if you rub the lamp you'll get your wish, but if you embrace your life and your light in the lamp, you will meet your attendant spirit, your genie, who will help guide you.
Mm-hmm.
So straight is the road to improvement, but crooked is the road to finding your attendant spirit.
That's really beautiful. I was looking at a quote of yours about how love awakens everything and how care erases the walls we keep building between us. And gosh, Carl and I were talking this morning about how many articles there have been in the last month about impending civil war in this country. And what a sad use of our imagination to keep seeding that that's where we're headed. And, I'm imagining, I would just like to read the stories about the possibility of this kind of care. Oh, I feel weepy asking it. That can really dissolve the walls we keep building between us. And I just love you to talk about that a little bit.
Well, thank you. We live in a very polarized and strident time. And, and I want to refer here, one of my books is called More Together Than Alone. And that book took a long time, it took 13 years to retrieve. And in that I was particularly searching to understand moments throughout history and cross-culturally when we worked well together, the stories of that. And they're everywhere, as are the stories in every generation of difficulty and cruelty. And, and I think that the things we're facing today are very real, but I believe that it's our turn. For us, it's the pandemic. For my parents' generation, it was World War II. Every generation has a very difficult challenge, and it's our turn. Are we going to erase the walls we build with love or not? Are we, and I think that, and there's a paradox underlying all this, because there's a paradox that is that we are they, there is no they. And that's a very difficult paradox, so I can watch the news, and if I had hair, I'd pull it out. And I go, I'm not that. And my spirit says, we are they. Be with that. And no, I'm not that. Don't tell me I'm that. So that's an ongoing conversation that each of us has to have, because under all of those differences, we are the same. And I think that so much, the age-old eternal choice, which is spiritually molecular, and that's the choice every day between fear and love. And if fear takes over, then we push each other away. Then we obey fear. See, fear, I've learned, because I've known a lot of fear in my life, that fear is to be moved through, not obeyed. If I ask my fear, what should I do? My fear will say, be more afraid. I need to move through my fear. I don't want to deny it or ignore it. It'll only get bigger. But I don't ask my fear for guidance. I
Right.
ask my heart for guidance, my spirit for guidance. I ask you, I ask friends for guidance if I can't find it myself. And so what happens when fear takes over is then we only trust what is familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And then we look what? We seek for only what will confirm what we already know.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that's going on today.
Right.
That's not education. Education is seeking what I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of I kind of offered a parable in More Together Than Alone, looking at this throughout history, and imagine, like we'll go all the way back to prehistoric times. Imagine the first cave people who discovered they were not alone. So, one's in the cave and another person's coming up on the out of the cave, and they go, "Oh my God, who are you?" And imagine that the one in the cave says, "You're different, go away." And I think that was the beginning of the go away tribe. And again, you look throughout history, and when that metastasizes and gets so prevalent, well, then we have in every generation, we have people so governed by fear and saying, "Go away." They say, "You know what? I can't trust you'll go away, so I'm going to put you where I can watch you. I'm going to put you in a ghetto, in a reservation, in a refugee camp."
Mm-hmm.
And then we've had these horrible times of genocide throughout history where people have been so frightened in their fear that they say, "I can't even trust you'll be there. I have to make you go away."
Mm-hmm.
But if you go all the way back to the mouth of that cave, and the other at the mouth of the cave says, "Oh, you're different. Come teach me."
Mm.
And I think that was the beginning of the Come Teach Me tribe.
Yeah.
"Oh, thank God you're not me. Teach me what I don't know, and I'll teach you what you don't know. And we're more together than alone." And that's led to all the periods of enlightenment throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
But the catch is, of course, that we always belong to both tribes,
Yeah.
and it's incumbent on us to I swear to you that I belong to the Come Teach Me tribe, but we can get off this conversation and something will happen today that'll trip me into fear, and I'll forget.
Mm-hmm.
And then I need you to remind me.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a great pause because of the pandemic where we need to remind each other that we belong to the Come Teach Me tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me just share one other thought about all this, and that I discovered through that retrieving that book on community. And in the Middle Ages in Europe, which we know as the Dark Ages, well, actually, the rest of the world, it was a very enlightened time. In the East, in India, it was just in the West that it was the Dark Ages. But in the Dark Ages, for about 350 years, only 10% of the European population was literate. That means 10% of the people living in Europe at that time kept literacy alive for 300 years. And whatever it is we are facing that is dark, when we are awake, because we're not always awake, we don't have we don't have the privilege of that all the time. But when we are awake, it's incumbent on us to keep the literacy of the heart alive. And that's, I think, so important right now.
I'm just going to be slightly teary through this whole conversation. I can tell.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, I think it's good. A sign of a good conversation. This is such a great segue to ask you to read If You Want a True Friend. Would you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. If you want a true friend, just open your hands and say, "I don't know." Say it softly and wait so your other can see that you mean it. Give them a chance to drop what they think is secret. Let them come up with a cup of what matters from the spring they show no one. Let them sigh and admit that they don't know either. Then you can begin with nothing in the way. Go on, admit to the throb you carry in your heart, and let the journey begin.
Mm. So beautiful.
Yeah. And such a resource for the Come Teach Me tribe. I mean, just thinking of, the challenge of pulling out the hair at the news stories, and this just how hard it is to really get to that place of not knowing and not being right.
And I also want to say,
I think it's,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say to have enough compassion and honesty to let our leaders also say that. And we don't allow them that either. But please.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, historically, great love and great suffering make us admit we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They make us open our heart. They make us say, come help me, come teach me. And this is through great love and great suffering. Everyone gets the chance to be dropped into the depth of life.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the deeper journey begins.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit. I was saying before we hit record that one of my favorites of your books is 7,000 Ways to Listen. And gosh, it seems like a skill that it's infinitely possible to learn about and improve the ways that we listen, and how needed that is right now. And I just wonder what's alive for you on that topic right now.
Oh, well, my God, I think that we need to be open-hearted and open-minded. And that involves not just listening with our mind, but with our heart.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Merton, the wonderful Thomas Merton, said, if we truly beheld each other, we'd fall down and worship each other.
Hmm.
And, often in my circles that I teach, when I invite people to be in dyads, I invite people not to crosstalk. That when one person talks, the other simply listens, not just being present, completely present. Because often what we do, even meaning well, is either one of two things. Either you're sharing with me something very important to you, and I want to help. And so I'm already going through my mind, how can I help? What can I offer? Or maybe all of a sudden I'm getting ready to tell a story to affirm what you've just shared. But as soon as I'm doing that, I'm not listening anymore. And we underestimate the power of our presence. Our presence allows the person who's sharing to discover what they didn't know they know.
Mm-hmm.
Because feeling from that depth for a soul is what sketching is for an artist. You have to, so one of the things is that if I truly listen to you, I don't know what I'm going to say next,
Mm-hmm.
because I will be changed by listening to you. So I think that that's so important to, we practice listening by listening with the heart. We have this thing in our modern world, to know by heart. We assume, oh, that means to memorize something. That's not what to know by heart means.
Mm.
To know by heart means I'm touched by you, and therefore what you've shared lives in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to remember it. It lives there.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah, and just how important that non-crosstalk is with other humans, with our own inner life, with canyons and rivers, to let that that conversation emerge freshly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and that's the real reward for silence. The real reward for silence is we remember and get a chance to inhabit our kinship with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all, whether, the web of connection is always there. We just lose sight of it from time to time. So I don't know if have you ever heard of Indras Net?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a wonderful metaphor. I mean, Indra's net, for those who are, listening, in the Hindu tradition, Indra is the god of connection, and it's believed that Indra created a castle and in the sky, and of course, and created a net that circled all of existence. And like any kind of net, just like a fishing net, it's held together at every little cross place. There's a little knot. But in Indra's net, wherever there would be a knot in a net of rope or twine, there was a jewel. And if you looked into that jewel, any one of them, you would see the entirety of all the other jewels in the entire net reflected in one clear jewel. And so, that became very quickly a metaphor for how, if you have an open and clear heart, then I will see all the other souls that ever lived and all of the connections in existence reflected, mirrored in your clear heart.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as human beings, our challenge is that we don't maintain a clear heart. And it's not always our fault. Some of it's just living, like this. I'm in my study and the window gets dirty. Not because it's stupid or it made a mistake. It's that life, nature, experience puts a film on the window and then we have to clean it. And so for human beings, we get a film to our mind, to our eyes, to our ears, to our heart. And part of the reason we need a spiritual practice and a practice of introspection is we have to clean the window of our eyes, the window of our mind, the window of our heart, not just once, continually. And so the thing is, when we're clear, we feel that we're a part of Indra's net. But when we're not, we think we're just kind of bouncing around by ourselves. We're still connected. We've just lost our awareness of it. We've just lost our awareness of it. In the Sufi tradition, they have a wonderful practice, a custom known as polishing the heart until it's a mirror.
Mm.
So you can see all of life in it, in each heart.
Yeah, it's such a helpful perspective too, that it's not a mistake or a shortcoming that the window gets dirty, and it's not, that's just life will dirty windows.
Yeah, right. And I'll tell you one more. This is a story from my grandmother, who was more of a mother to me than my mother. She was an old Russian immigrant at the turn of the 1900s. She came to this country and lived in Brooklyn, and I loved being with her. And toward the end of her life, she lived to be 94, and I would visit her in a hospital in Brooklyn that's no longer exists. And I came one day on a beautiful day, um, and and she had been living in a room with one window. And this is before there was assisted living. They were kind of discovering they needed assisted, but people like my grandmother at that stage of life were just kind of taken care of in a wing of a hospital, when that became kind of the seed for assisted living as we know it. And so I came in this day, and I happened to come into her room, and I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting on the bed, and she looked really glum, and I came in, I said, "Grandma," and she perked up, and I said, "What, how are you? What's the matter?" And she said in her thick Russian accent, she said, "Oh, it's a gray day." Well, it was a beautiful day, and I immediately thought, oh, she's 93, 94. Is she not with it? Is she not lucid anymore? And then I looked around, and the one window she had not been cleaned in like 8 months. So it was a gray day for her. So I said, Grandma, that the window's dirty, we'll get it cleaned, but it's a beautiful day. I'll take you out into the courtyard. And she sat on the edge of the bed, and as only an immigrant, almost 100, could say, she chuckled and she looked at the window and she said, got a dirty eye, see a dirty world.
Mm. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Got a dirty eye, see a dirty world. And I count that as immigrant wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times her wisdom saved me. Certainly there will be gray days, but before we put all of our energy into fighting against a gray day or whatever it might be, let's make sure it's just not a dirty window, that it's not, that we clean the window of our eye, our ears, our heart, our mind.
Mm-hmm. This makes me want to ask for another poem, if I could, which
Sure.
is To Glow.
Oh, to glow, yeah. Let me just get that.
It brings a line to mind that
Oh,
our conversation just about the dirty window.
yeah, so let me read that. I had to let my dog out there. She must hear my wife. This is to glow. Like light in the sun spilling out of the sun, the spirit within beams its way through all our cracks till our most treasured walls come down. The coming down of those walls is the blessing we crave and resist. The coming down of those walls, so the light of the soul, like the light of the sun, can help the world grow. This is the call of calls.
Mm. I love that. It's sort of a similar, I mean, the dirty window reminds me of that, but it's from within to out as well as out to in. And that line about what we crave and resist, the crumbling of those treasured walls, feels so, just what an apt and gorgeous description that is.
No, well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You know, I think that we are challenged. I think in life, we are, I think, miseducated to think that life is about going from here to there.
Mm.
And we're confused because certainly in the outer surface world, we do go from here to there. I go from my house to the drugstore and home and whatever it might be. But in the inner world, we're only alive. The journey is not from here to there, it's from in to out. It's from in to out. And one of the great teachings about this, teachers are flowers.
Mm.
So, like, if you just think of this, and then we can apply it to the soul's journey. So, any flower starts as a seed underground, and that seed, like a cell, has DNA and has all of the capacities encoded in it of what a human being could be. Well, the entire flower is in that seed. And the seed, buried underground, begins to grow toward a force it has no conception of, light. It has no previous experience, understanding of what light is, and yet it's growing toward it. And then it breaks ground, at which point it now grows in two directions. It grows inwardly and outwardly, roots and shoots. And then when it's strong enough, and its roots are strong enough, and its stem is strong enough, it starts to flower. And when a flower blooms, it's literally revealing its beauty by turning itself inside out. And it does this without going anywhere. Well, isn't this remarkably, it's a wonderful kind of outline of the spiritual journey here on, of a body, spirit in a body and time on earth.
It's just beautiful.
Yeah, I've never made that connection before of moving toward light in the total darkness with no knowledge of light, no memory of light, or maybe there is a memory of light.
Well, and we do this if we trust our heart. If we don't let our mind dissuade our heart, unravel our heart.
Mm-hmm.
Because the word trust literally means to follow the heart.
Mm-hmm. I'm wanting to ask, we've used these gorgeous images of polishing the mirror of the heart or cleaning the window or, distinguishing and choosing in a way between fear and love. And, as we started talking about the greatly polarized times and its pandemic and racial reckoning very much needed, and its climate crisis that doesn't seem to be turning around or slowing down. So I'm thinking of folks listening, feeling inspired and touched, but then, we read the news or we have a conversation. How do you, or what might you invite in listeners to clean the window of the heart when we're feeling really,
I
despairing
think,
or. Yeah.
Well, and let me say also, just very, honestly, that, I struggle as much as anyone with all of these divisions and stridencies, and you know what, I often say that what I share are examples, not instructions,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all trying to figure this out together. But I believe deeply that we have to work very personally with the things that are before us. Mother Teresa said, courage is doing small things with love.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that the world and life keeps going because there are more gestures of kindness and kinship than there are of things breaking apart. And we don't know every day if the one anonymous gesture that you do might be the one gesture that's keeping life going today. You could help someone who dropped their groceries in the parking lot, pick it all up and help them to their car. And you may never know that that was the gesture that kept life going.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this commitment that I think I feel deeply. And it's not just mine. There's the lineage of this, of how we need to keep repairing the connections wherever we are, and not be drawn into making more things break apart. Things are always coming together and breaking apart. That's like spiritual physics. It's actually like physical physics. But in the spiritual sense, when things come apart, they make a lot of noise. When things come together, they're very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we live in a time globally where I believe, are addicted to the noise of things falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like the 27 news cycle, and everything is led with destruction and tragedy, and so it's not that we should turn from those things. It's not that but we need to balance those things with as much news of things coming together, which are always happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that there's balance and things are right sized.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and to get that, in many ways, that's intentional. The barrage of things that keeps us on Netflix and keeps us buying things and keeps that sort of, the momentum of late capitalism going. If we're just taking in the negative and not balancing with all that's coming together, and I think it's so helpful to underline the not knowing what the tipping point could be, that any moment of kindness or care or ordinary connection could be the one that keeps life going.
So let me share with you how I came to reflect on that so much. And it came from a couple of years ago. I was reading a book by Neil deGrasse Tyson, the wonderful physicist in New York. He's director of the Museum of Natural History, and he wrote a book. It was kind of glibly titled "Astrophysics for People in a Hurry." And it was anything but. It was very dense primer kind of, but in the very beginning of it, he shares as a physicist his notion of how the universe came into being, and what he and I'm sure it's not just his, but quantum physicists have this take on things that in the very beginning, the very first seconds of life of the universe, matter and antimatter were kind of, fighting each other or competing or eating each other up. Who was going to, and the matter, which was known as photons, and the antimatter was known as hadrons. And when there was 1,000,000,001 photons, as opposed to 1,000,000,000 hadrons, just one more, the universe came into existence. And he conjectures that if the Earth had settled in its orbit a little closer to the sun, all the water would have evaporated, there'd be no life. Or if it had settled a little farther away from the sun, it would have all frozen and there'd be no life. And I was so struck, just what we're saying, that by what small gesture, everything is here. And then as I was doing errands about a week after reading that and reflecting on it, all of a sudden I was in the middle of a store and just overwhelmed with, this isn't a description of how the universe began. This is a description of the universe and life as an ongoing creation. And this gave me an understanding of the purpose of goodness, is to how do we have to have always one more photon. What's the one gesture that will endure and keep life going? Every day, this happens again and again and again. And this, to me, so now you take that and you couple it with, we'll go back now to 300 BC, the Chinese philosopher Mencius, who's a wonderful heart philosopher. He was in the Confucian tradition, but Confucius, for all of his brilliance, was not a spiritual or heart-centered philosopher. And Mencius brought heart to it all, and he had two images. He said that there's a Chinese notion of what's known as Ren, R-E-N, and he was hard-pressed to describe it, and he described it. It's often named as benevolence or kindness or the golden rule. And he said, I can't really define it, but if you were to see a child on the edge of a well about to fall, that thing in you that would make you drop everything and try to save that child, that's Ren. And that's the impulse of goodness. That's the photon. He had another image that was beautiful. He said that human beings are innately kind. The way that water, allowed its true nature, will always flow downhill and join other water. Human beings, allowed their true nature, will always flow to each other and be kind. We can manipulate ourselves or each other away from that goodness, but allowed our true nature, like water, we will flow to each other and join. So that's always there. And in times that we're in every generation, just as we've been talking, the film gets on the window. And then if we think the window is never clear, and then we start building philosophies on fear and distance and go away, then we get very estranged from our nature. And just one more thing here, and I'll stop, pause, but this ties in with something I learned in that More Together Than Alone book. So, in the 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution began, Uh, Karl Marx in Europe, and Karl Marx gets a bad rap. I mean, Karl Marx didn't create Marxism. He had insights that were quite profound, and it'd be like saying the person who created the artificial heart. Well, he wasn't the doctor who tried to put it in somebody. So if that didn't work, you can't blame the guy who designed it. So anyway, all this to say, let's not lose the great insights he had. So in 1844, he's seeing, like everyone else, the Industrial Revolution starting, and he's realizing that for the first time, labor is getting mechanized, and there's division of labor, and this is going to have a tremendous effect, he foresees, on relationships. And he foresees that people living in that kind of a society will start to become divorced from their true nature. And he said, if you have enough people divorced from your true nature, you have an alien nation. And he coined the term alienation. And he foresaw original therapists as people who would help individuals restore their true nature. And he called them alienists. Were the first therapists in the late 1800s. This is very profound, and we today are in need of anything and anyone who so we can help each other restore our true nature.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. I'd like to ask for another poem. I love weaving these.
Sure.
What a gift to just be able to request your poems and weave them into the conversation. This is one, I mean, I probably say this of everyone I've asked you to read, and more that is a favorite, but this is a special favorite, is The Dive. There's such a teaching in this one that's just so important.
Well, thank you. The Dive. Brave your way on. You are a blessing waiting to be discovered by yourself. The wisdom waits in your heart like a buried treasure, which only loving yourself can bring to the surface. And yes, loving yourself is like diving to the bottom of the ocean with nothing but who you are to find your way.
What a prescription for alienation right there, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Gosh, would you like to say anything more about that poem? I want to leave it to you instead of me commenting.
Well, I think that there's a great central paradox to being alive. One is that no one has ever been here who's you. No one can live your life or feel what you feel or see what you see. And the other side of the paradox is that no one can make it alone. When we think we can make it alone, we're actually ill. The humility that is necessary to say, no, I can't make it alone. And yet no one can live my life for me. So yes, we are each a blessing waiting to be discovered by ourselves. And the only way is to dive to the bottom of our spirit, so that we need to affirm. So let me cast this way. So, because this is at the heart of, or the intersection of, our own journey and our relational journey with others, is that in relationship, we are more together than alone. We need that belonging. And of course, the shadow of that is that being in relationship, I can easily give myself away to you. So my worth only comes from restoring my direct experience of life. So say we're friends, and I perceive that you say something that hurts me. And because I respect you, it hurts all the more. I go, oh my God, that's what you think of me, you know? And so that hurts. And I might have a reflex to try to reach to you to reaffirm my sense of myself. Well, you didn't really mean it, or can you explain what you said, or maybe we need to repair. Maybe it was hurtful, and I need to say, that hurt. So there's all of that, but nothing will restore my worth by reaching back to you. That is an inside job, and that's what the dive is about. That is the only thing that will restore my worth, is restoring my direct connection with life and with my being. That, back to that poem about sitting under the tree, being in the particulars of my life while also being connected to everything that's larger than me.
It's so beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, all of it just comes to stretching different paradoxes and being able to, hold those seemingly opposing forces and rest in the middle.
Mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think we just are all asked to let life continue to be our teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that we need to, which again is very important today, we need to let in more views than our own. There's a great, in Native American elder circles, elder councils, and they've done this for hundreds of years, and still do it today. They meet in circle not for equity, because there's no head to the circle, but they meet in circle so that everyone has a direct view of the center. I love that.
It's so different than I'm right, you're wrong.
Well, the assumption there, the implication is no one views enough. If we're going to understand whatever is in the center, we need everybody's view. So that says we don't choose meaning, we gather it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We gather. So forget debate, persuasion. I'm not interested in any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in, like a prism. Oh, this is what I see from over here. What do you see from over there?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you see? Oh, and all three of what we see is more important than any one view.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And not complete.
And never complete. As soon as someone comes along, we need to add their view.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking of earlier in our conversation, speaking about, as I said, what a sort of impoverished and sad choice, a use of imagination to imagine we're heading towards civil war. And just what you're describing right here, sort of the council model of listening. I just want to underline this. Like, I want to scatter the seeds of the vision of more of that happening. It's
Well,
possible.
absolutely. And there, the divisions that are out there are real, and we need to be the one more photon of goodness, so there won't be a civil war this time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all. I think that's all we can do, is to stay visible and loving and renewing of the kinship among and between all things.
Mm. Can I request one more poem?
Sure.
This one is Be a Circle.
Oh, yes.
Feels like a wonderful blessing.
Oh, be a circle. I wish you the ability to breathe after pain, to begin again, though nothing else seems possible. I wish you resilience to part like the ocean and accept like the sky. I wish you a survival to take in life like a trapped miner finding an air hole and praising it as God. I wish you courage to ask of everything you meet, what bridge are we? I wish that the kindness that you are can brighten your way like orange leaves falling about the face of a doe. I wish you endless journey that seldom appears as we imagine. I wish you curiosity to make a boat of wonder and an oar of gratitude.
May it be so.
May it be so.
Mark, we could talk to you all day.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure to hang out with you in this way. And we're thrilled you're coming to Salt Lake City, and we'll get to see you in person.
Oh, well, thank you both. I look forward to seeing you in person, and I look forward to being with you in those days. That would be wonderful.
And I just want to say thank you so much for your work, your writing, your retrieving, and for just continuing to open the gateways toward, that one photon, making those choices toward kindness and goodness. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you guys for your good work too.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.